In terms of organization, we've had 6 meetings, 5 of them through Skype, and 1 face-to-face meeting in TCI Congress in Korea. Basically, with Kelly, we agreed in 4 different issues that we wanted to share knowledge about. The first one was cluster policy. I believe that you learn when you share your failures. So really try to share with Kelly our failures, our constraints, our difficulties through all these 23 years, which indeed we've been through that in different periods for different reasons. So cluster policy was the first issue that we talked about. Second one was cluster analysis. Her cluster didn't have a formal cluster analysis, so the second session was about sharing the methodology on how to carry out a cluster analysis. This is a tricky thing because you know that I would say that all over the world that cluster development is about analysis and process. And if you don't start with a strong, robust analysis, it's very difficult that the process is going in the right direction. So in Catalonia, we have a methodology. All our clusters start with a cluster analysis. Right now we have 30 clusters, and we've been through different analyses in the past. So maybe we've been through, I don't know, 70 cluster analyses. We have a lot of experience. Our methodology is based in 8 steps. For instance, defining the cluster scope, business mapping, how to identify the international trends, how to define the strategic challenges. So we're sharing that with Kelly. It was very good that session, which is very specific and very, I would say there is a lot of know-how in that, was the session previous to the face-to-face meeting in Korea. Because in Korea we had time to develop that issue, So I think that was an important part of our process to have the chance to do 2 sessions on cluster analysis. Actually, between session number 2 and number 3, we exchanged some emails, for instance, on the cluster, on the interviews that Kelly was, developing with her members. So we shared through the mail the questions in an interview for, developing an analysis. So it was very tailored and very hands-on. After the analysis, indeed, we spoke about the process. How do you transform the information you have in a survey into actions with companies? Actually, it's my field of expertise. So I tried to help her in terms of process and some tips on doing that, on gathering companies that are competitors, on helping them changing the business models and so on, which is quite difficult to do. And the last session was about governance. In her case, the cluster initiative is led by the city council, but there is no private governance. There are no companies leading the cluster yet. So it was recommended that it's important that at the beginning there is this public leadership, but after some time you need the companies to take the lead. And I was sharing with her, the model we have in Catalonia. We have, 15 companies in the board. Then there is a cluster manager. We talk about the profile of the cluster manager. In our case, we don't look for sectorial experts, but we look for cluster managers with what we call T-shaped talent. So very good at strategic vision, project management, communication skills, creating trust, and so on. So as a summary, that was our program: cluster policy, strategic analysis, process, and governance. As a mentor, it's been very interesting because there is a process of self-reflection when you're trying to help somebody. If you are there in your role, you have to think about what you're doing before explaining what the other one should listen from you. And once you listen to the reactions, there is a process of self-reaction of what you're doing and what you're teaching in here in Catalonia at least. So it's very good for this self-reflection process as a trainer. It's also very interesting because, as I said in the beginning, this specific cluster is far away from our country and it's very different. Actually, in Catalonia, we have 30 clusters and we don't have the creative industries cluster. So it's been useful for me also to get to know a new cluster, which is different from the ones that we have here, a person from a distant country. But at the end of the day, the situations, the constraints and the realities in this cluster in Australia, very similar to the ones I have here. So it's been very good to get this confirmation that cluster development, I would say, it's more or less the same, regardless where you are in the world. Then indeed there is the relationship with Kelly. After these 6 meetings, I think that she knows that she's able to, contact me for anything that she may need in the future. I know that if my companies or my cluster want to enter Australia to have a relationship with a creative industries cluster, now I know her. So indeed there is a window of opportunities for collaboration in the future. And indeed, if from this specific cluster there is a new cluster policy in Australia and they want to establish some collaboration with Catalonia as a pioneering cluster policy, we would be happy indeed to do so. So I would say network, knowledge, self-reflection, and opportunities for future collaborations.